twins for adoption by different parents in England, and then moved on to Germany, where she married. A year later, deeply unhappy in this situation, she committed suicide.
And then I felt, well, that story can't end there. Somehow, I don't know why, so I wrote to Hammersmith Hospital, who put me forward to social services and confirmed, yes, there was a birth 12 minutes prior to mine.
Finding her twin took years, including a court injunction to learn Daphne's married name. But when the two finally met at the age of 40, neither of the twins felt like strangers.
Well, do you know, to me it was just like meeting a friend that I hadn't seen for a long time.
And that's just what it felt like for us.
Yeah, so it didn't seem strange that this was a stranger that I'm meeting. It was just like a relative I hadn't seen for a long, long time, and I was pleased to meet them, and fine.
We didn't even introduce our husbands to each other, did we? We just thought that we know each other, they know each other.
So we walked off the platform and left them behind.
Despite being kept apart for so long, the twins' lives were remarkably alike. They married men with the same first names. They have mother-in-laws who share the same names and birthdays. They own the same clothes in the same colours, bought from the same stores in different towns. They both repainted their corridors in the same odd shade of gold in the same month, and each miscarried a child within days of the other. Such coincidences between strangers turned the twins into a fascinating natural laboratory. It was not long before news of their reunion reached scientists working on the Twins Project at the University of Minnesota. In America, Barbara and Daphne were given 20,000 tests designed to throw light on the inheritance of human behavior.
We even did write the same thing in one of the tests.
It's silly writing, wasn't it? It was a short sentence. And we can't spell cat, can we?
Well, you go in and this psychologist, wherever it is, it says, sit down, you sit down. Would you write a sentence? Well, I was waiting for him to tell me what sentence to write. So he said, no, quickly, you know, just write a sentence. So I quickly put the cat sat on the mat. But I misspelled cat. My brain must have been working funny because I put the CAS, the cat sat on the mat. And then the next day,
I did exactly the same. The same sentence, and I can't spell cat either. Mine came out CAS.
In spite of 40 years of separation, the twins appear to be linked at an unconscious level, even if they don't think of themselves as telepathic.
I mean, say sometimes we look at each other and we seem to sense what the other one's going to say or do, but I wouldn't say it's telepathic.
No. I never had tests on telepathy.
It seems unlikely that the unusual connections between Barbara and Daphne are the result of genetics alone. But it would be interesting to know if such linkages can be forged between people who share no genes at all. At the Churchill Clinic in London, research is underway to show that some unconscious connections do exist. That emotional bonds do build up between people who are genetic strangers. That these bonds can allow them to share information in unusual ways. Folklore suggests that long-lasting couples do grow to look and sound alike. Are such resemblances more than skin deep? Could their brains begin to work in the same way?
This is an experiment to see if we can get a transference of your brain activity from one person to the other.
Clinical psychologist Dr. Peter Fennick suspects that like minds may forge a sort of telepathic contact.
And then plug yourselves in and just listen to the beeps. The experiment sets out to answer the question, are people in some way coupled to each other? If you get a loving couple, or people who know each other very well and like their partner, then you can get a transfer of brain activity from one to the other.
During this experiment, the couple's brainwaves are monitored. They also wear headphones, over which a special tone is played at random intervals. Only one of them hears the tone. The other does not. The question is, when one person hears the tone, does the other register this awareness in any way? If they do, then there would appear to be an unexplained connection between the two individuals. Dr. Fennick has found that in some circumstances, there is such transference. People who are genetically unrelated, but emotionally close, do sometimes seem to be unconsciously aware of what is happening to the other.
here you can see, again, we have the two subjects. This is the subject who is not being stimulated, and this is the subject who is being stimulated. And you can see the evoked response here, and it's very clear. Now, these two subjects are in empathic relationship with each other. And if you look at this, you can see at the time the stimulus comes, you get a marked change in the brain rhythms of the other person.
So something, it seems, may extend beyond the brain and make some sort of telepathic contact. Both in couples who just happen to be emotionally involved, and in twins who we know are also genetically linked. But does connection necessarily end there? What about contact between total strangers? Almost everyone at some time has had the feeling of being stared at from behind. Sometimes because there really is someone there, doing just that. It also seems possible, just by staring intently at the back of someone's head, to make them uncomfortable enough to turn around. Skeptics dismiss such claims as groundless superstition. But the idea is so widespread and so persistent that two psychologists have recently set out to investigate it for themselves.
Around about 90% of the population experience the staring phenomena in everyday life. So they will have that feeling of being stared at. It's a very common sensation. And so when we bring people into the lab and we say the experiment is about this feeling of being stared at, it makes sense to them. Instantly they go, oh, I've experienced that. It's really interesting to see whether it's going to work under these conditions.
The question is this due to some kind of heightened peripheral vision that we're not consciously aware of? Or is there some kind of non-sensory exchange of information that's occurring between the two people?
Okay, these two sensors will measure how stressed or relaxed you are, and they need to go into your first...
So Dr. Wiseman, the skeptic who thought there was nothing in it, and Dr. Schlitz, who believed the phenomenon might be a form of psychic ability, converged on it in search of the truth.
Okay, I don't want you to try and guess when you're being stared at. Just relax. If occasionally you want to look up at the camera, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll see you in about 15 minutes. Okay, thanks.
In this investigation into the sense of being stared at, each subject is wired up to equipment that records their physiological responses. They are encouraged to relax, and to ensure that their response is not cued by sound, smell, or peripheral vision, the starers look in from another room, through the eye of a closed-circuit television camera. Everything is arranged so that at random intervals and for varying periods of time, the experimenter can give instructions for staring to begin and end.
At the end of the experiment, you then look at the person's physiology and say, well, were they more stressed or more relaxed when they were being stared at than when they weren't? And if that's the case, it suggests there's something unusual, perhaps psychic going on. If not, then you can say, okay, there seemed to be no link between the stare and what the person's physiology was doing.
The physiological signs in which both Wiseman and Schlitz are most interested are autonomic. They are not under conscious control. If these change while people are being stared at, this suggests their bodies are somehow aware of the scrutiny.
What we're looking at is the claim that people make that, for example, they get little tingles up the back of their neck when somebody's staring at them and that makes them look up. Well, this is the kind of thing that represents an autonomic response.
The two psychologists made independent investigations and came up with different results. In her study, Marilyn Schlitz found the subjects were, both consciously and unconsciously, aware of being stared at. Richard Wiseman, on the other hand, got completely negative results.
We carried out 4 studies of our own here and found absolutely no effect at all. All our results were at chance.
Marilyn Schlitz travelled from California to the University of Herefordshire in England to repeat the experiments with Richard Wiseman.
We used the same facilities, the same equipment, the same randomization procedure, the same subject population. Everything was identical except that I worked with half the people and he worked with half the people. And we both replicated our initial findings. In other words, I found a significant difference in the average amount of autonomic nervous system activity during the staring periods as compared to the control periods. Richard found nothing.
Perplexed by the results, the two decided to repeat the experiment yet again. This time in her laboratory.
Again, everything was identical, same subjects, same equipment, same randomization, and we again replicated the effect where I found a difference and Richard didn't. This suggests that there is something about the intentionality, the belief system, the perceptions of the experimenter that may influence the outcome of the experiments.
Maybe it's a way in which we deal with the subjects. When they came into the lab, Marilyn was very positive. She said, I've done this many times before, it's always worked, here we go. You know, I was the skeptic saying, well, it's a bit of a waste of time, but, you know, let's give it a go. And maybe that has an impact on the experiment. But the important thing is the experimenter seems to matter. And if it matters in parapsychology, it's going to matter in mainstream science. And that's why we're investigating the whole area.
The problem could also be one of experimental design. In the real world, the starer and the subject are not in separate rooms linked only by a television cable. They share the same space. And awareness of being watched here is precisely the sort of subtle sense that natural selection would encourage and encode in our genes. Simply because it has survival value, it makes biological sense. And this may not be the only subtle influence to which we respond. We pick up far more information than our brains can handle. And in San Francisco, a parapsychologist is suggesting that this massive information includes not only news about what is happening, but clues to what is about to happen.
To date, we've run something like 70 people through this experiment, and these are unselected volunteers. They're not people who claim to have any kind of special psychic ability. And what we see is that about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people show significant effects. They're showing that they are unconsciously aware of their future.
While teaching at the University of Nevada, Dr. Radin devised an experiment to test presentiment, the possibility that people can sense events a split second before they occur. The procedure is simple. Each subject looks at a series of images, some pornographic, some violent, and some familiar. These are selected entirely at random by computer. No one, including the experimenter, knows what the subject is about to see. She's attached to instruments that measure heart rate, blood pressure, and skin resistance. Changes in these show tension, over which we have no conscious control. The only thing she can control is when the picture changes. Then she displays a strong response to violent or erotic images, or a weak response to household objects. But Dr. Radin's extraordinary discovery is that many subjects are able to anticipate the images. They respond in the expected way, but they do so before the picture appears on the screen, before even it has been selected by the computer.
What we also find interesting in the experiment is that if you ask people to consciously guess what kind of picture is about to come up, they can't do the task very well. And in fact, it completely wipes out the physiological changes. So what this suggests is that somehow we are unconsciously aware of our future, even under conditions when you cannot infer what that future is.
These amazing results caught the attention of another scientist, who was moved to replicate Radin's procedure at the University of Amsterdam.
Well, the presentiment phenomenon is a phenomenon that is, in fact, impossible according to traditional thinking in science.
But when Dr. Bierman analyzed his data, he was astonished by what he found. It was clear from the results that Dutch subjects were also able to anticipate the images, producing the appropriate result a fraction of a second before the picture appeared. Their bodies sensed what their eyes had yet to see, setting up extreme reactions before there was any obvious reason to do so. Such preemptive responses may well have a selective advantage, but for the moment, they remain scientifically mysterious.
I was amazed when I found that I got the same results as in God, and I couldn't believe my eyes.
Intuition, gut feelings, and hunches have always been part of our lives. We seem to have a natural capacity for being aware of things without knowing how or why. But if we do indeed have a talent for leaving our bodies, for remote viewing, or for anticipating the future, then these are likely to be biological gifts, common to our whole species, rather than bestowed on just a few individuals. Research in these areas is becoming more focused on the possibilities open to ordinary people, rather than concentrating on the performances of psychic superstars. Science is beginning to find that some of the strongest evidence in support of such odd events comes from the lives of each one of us, which means that the unusual may not be so unusual after all, and that you too could be extraordinary without even knowing.